Hello everyone. Today we read August Strindberg's Preface to Miss Julie. Now, this particular reading is considered to be one of the most important readings when it comes to our understanding of 20th century theatre. And August Strindberg's Preface to Miss Julie is actually a part of much of the university syllabi when it comes to 20th century theatre and 20th century drama. So before going into the reading, let me first talk a little bit about August Strindberg and try to explain what the author represented and why he said the things that he said in Preface to Miss Julie and what was his main body of work like. So August Strindberg was a Swedish playwright born in a poor family in Stockholm. He would identify himself with a poor family. His mother was a former waitress, and in his autobiography, he calls himself the son of a servant. He was a dramatist of contemporary problems, and in many of his plays, he shows the contempt of bureaucracy and official institutions. He also critiques class hierarchy, and this is a theme which we also see in his play Miss Julie. His first work was called The Red Room, and today it is proclaimed as the first modern Swedish novel. As a person, he was prone to mental breakdowns, and they happened very frequently for him. And he also was profoundly interested in occult and psychic sciences. In fact, he took a break in his career in order to explore these areas. Miss Julie was published in 1906, and 1907 was the year when he established something that he called intimate theatre or intima theatre, which would be which would be less affected by theatricality and was towards a more realistic form of theatre. As we know, 20th century theatre or 20th century drama was a move away from the 19th century drama of romantic theatre that was very melodramatic, that had song, that had dance, that had happy endings. And it was very, in a way, it was very unrealistic. It was full of characters. 20th century playwrights wanted to do their drama differently. And Emile Zola's Naturalism on Stage, which was written in 1881, marked the beginning of naturalistic plays. But the problem with the plays of the 20th century was also that these plays were also very plot heavy. There were many twists and turns in the plot. But the playwrights insisted that in terms of the psychology of characters, they are moving close towards nature. And this is something which is maintained by August Strindberg as well. And he also says that the form, even though plot does not completely changed, that would happen a lot later, but the form of drama became much more experimental when we reached the 20th century. Now, what is the play Miss Julie about? Miss Julie is a play, and the preface to Miss Julie is really inspired by Darwin's Origin of Species. As we know, it is one of the most important works when it comes to the change or the shift in literature in the 19th century, both in terms of the novel as well as in terms of drama. So, Miss Julie is a play where the protagonist is a woman who breaks off her own engagement and then flirts and then mates with a man of lesser means, and this man is named Jean. So, the play disapproves of the character of Miss Julie. Jean is already engaged to another woman called Christine, and despite knowing this, Miss Julie goes on flirting with him and ordering him and teasing him around. So Miss Julie is, from the very beginning, there is some derision about this character, which the playwright expresses. Um, so Miss Julie is also bluffed by Jean's stories, and she falls in love with him. Therefore, she is not ladylike. And in the beginning of the play, we are also told that she whips a man. So she's totally taking on a role that is not meant for her, according to the playwright. So we are also told that Julie's mother believed in equality, her father hated women, and her mother hated men. So what does this make Julie? Julie has a difficult childhood, and her parentage is, according to the playwright, he feels that since Julie is born of parents who did not give her the right seed, Miss Julie is also unfit to be staying in the society, and this idea is inspired by Darwin's Origin of Species. We would go ahead and understand why. So, the reader of today would be able to identify with or sympathize with the protagonist like Miss Julie. However, Strindberg believed that such a character was doomed to fall. He believed that women are masochistic by nature, and therefore Jean as a man is more suited for evolution rather than Miss Julie, whose parentage gave her these flaws, and hence she's unsuitable to have a progeny, to have children of her own. And Strindberg was these these thoughts are um, very odd, but Strindberg was known to be a woman hater, and many of his quotes make it clear. One of the quotes from Strindberg, I'm just going to read it. Women begrudge a man paternal happiness and will deprive him of it even at the risk of drawing upon themselves the suspicion that they are whores. But give them a hint of that suspicion and all hell is let loose. So basically, he's saying that um, women and men are not equal, and that women have to be shown their place in society. So when we read Miss Julie, we have to keep in mind that this is the generation that has taken Darwin's Origin of Species very seriously, and through the 19th century, it was widely believed, and for a very long time, it was believed by many institutions that uh, that passing on your genetic line was not an individual right, and that society should be saved from bad seeds, as it were. So even at the policy level, many women were administered hysterectomies in the US because they were considered to be unfit. I'm going into these directions because of the kind of reading that we have. Now let's go to the actual reading and try to understand what Strindberg says actually in the reading of Preface to Miss Julie. Now we would go through the reading, Preface to Miss Julie, and try to see what is the politics of this reading, and what does it really represent when it comes to 20th century drama. So in the very beginning, August Strindberg makes it clear that drama has had a role to play, and it has an important role to play, but of late people have been thinking that drama is only about teaching something to the society and teaching something to people who do not have the very right mindset. He says that theater has always been an elementary school for the young and the semi-educated, and for women who still have a primitive capacity for deceiving themselves. So he says that drama is a form of art which is supposed to be teaching people. But he at the same time says that the role of theater, role of drama is not just to teach, but to do much more than that, which is, according to him, to tell the truth. So he says that through his plays, he actually tells the truth. He says, when I look at this theme, when I took this theme from a true story told me some years ago, which made a deep impression, I saw it as a subject for tragedy. Uh, and he says that this would be considered to be a tragedy today, because he says um, he says as a subject for tragedy, as yet it is tragic to see one favored by fortune go under, and still more to see a family heritage die out, although a time may come when we have grown so developed and enlightened that we shall view with indifference life's spectacle, now seeming so brutal, cynical, and heartless. So he says that over the years, we would be able to see this as just a part of nature. At this point of time, we see this as tragedy, but change of fortunes is just a part of nature, and Slowly and steadily, when we shall have dispensed with those inferior, unreliable instruments of thought called feelings, this kind of reasoning would become, as reasoning would develop, feelings would become superfluous. So he says reason is greater than emotion. He eventually says that a hypersensitive spectator, as of now, would sympathize with the heroine, but since emotion is inferior to reason, one, this kind of sympathy is unfounded. Okay, and over the years, old power has to give way to new power. And as I was telling you in the very beginning of this video, that he does not identify himself with the elite, and he is very much for the for upward mobility of lower classes. And so he says that when we have grown strong as pioneers of French Revolution, we shall be happy and relieved to see the national parks cleared of ancient rotting trees which have stood too long in the way of others equally entitled to a period of growth. So he says old power has to eventually give way to a new class, and class conflict is therefore inevitable to any part of the society. So, in the very beginning, he talks about the whole idea of tragedy and his own politics about what we really think is tragedy. He says that if you identify with the with the protagonist, it is because of your own weakness. He uses actually the word weakness in one of the lines. He says, in fact, that my heroine rouses pity is solely due to weakness. So if you identify with your protagonist, it's because you are being over emotional, you're being oversensitive, and that is not a rational thing to do. And all this is, again, a 20th century attitude. Now, this is a very important section in this particular piece. He talks about how the character of Miss Julie is only a product of her heredity and her circumstance, and that whatever she does is due to some reason either in her heredity or in a circumstance. So I read this entire extract because this extract seems to be very important when it comes to um, paper setters, and this is a particular extract which is I found in many question papers. So let me just go through it also. I see Miss Julie's tragic fate to be the result of many circumstances. The mother's character, the father's mistaken upbringing of the girl, her own nature, and the influence of a fiance in a weak, degenerate mind. Also, more directly, the festive mood of Midsummer Eve, her father's absence, her monthly indisposition, her preoccupation with animals, the excitement of the dancing, the magic of dusk, the strongly aphrodisiac influence of flowers, and finally, the chance that drives the couple into a room alone. So she says, and also to which must be added the urgency of the excited man. So he says that Miss Julie's downfall is actually the result of her heredity, her her bodily chemistry, her circumstance, and not really her character as such. And eventually, we would see that he questions the whole idea of a character. He says that I have not put the blame wholly on the inheritance from her mother, nor her physical condition at that time, nor her immorality. He says that I'm not judging her, but he says that in regard to drawing of characters, I have made my people somewhat characterless. And what do we mean by characters? He says that a person who has ceased to grow is called a character. When somebody is continuing to develop, that for him is not really a character. He says, my souls or characters are conglomerations of past and present stages of civilization, bits from books and newspapers, scraps of humanity, rags and tatters of fine clothing, patched together as a human soul. Therefore, the people that he creates in his place, he says, the people are so driven by heredity and circumstance that nothing can really be attributed to willpower or to their own characterization, really. Um, and in short, he's suggesting that that Miss Julie is basically a product of her heredity, and this again is an interesting extract, which is also a frequently quoted text when it comes to his misogyny. He says, Miss Julie is a modern character, not that a half woman, the man hater, has not existed always, but because now that she has been discovered, she has stepped to the front and begun to make noise. The half woman is a type who thrusts herself forward, selling herself nowadays for power, decorations, distinctions, diplomas, as formerly for money. The type implies degeneration. It is not good type. It does not endure, but it can unfortunately transmit its misery, and degenerate men seem instinctively to choose their mates from among such women. So he says that, in short, he's saying that such women should not be breeding. Such women should not be um, allowed to give birth. He says, but fortunately they perish either because they cannot come to terms with reality, or because their repressed instincts break out uncontrollably. And we notice that this is an idea which is inspired by, again, Darwin's survival of the fittest, that anybody who's a misfit would not be able to adapt to the society, would not be able to adapt to the world, and eventually that whole species would perish. So he says that such women who are born of a degenerate kind of a heredity, they perish, either they perish themselves, or they perish, or they should be allowed to die because they are just unfit to be in the society. Now we also get to know some of his ideas about the warrior nobility. He says that she belongs to a nobility of old warrior nobility, which has to give it anyway to new nobility, new nerve and brain. So even in terms of the class, this class has to slowly dissipate, this class has to slowly disappear and give way to a new class. And here we come to this new character. Here he talks about Jean. He considers Jean to be an ideal type who is able to adapt, who is able to move ahead in his life, and therefore this makes Jean the perfect fit who should be able to, who should be allowed to have a progeny. He says, hence his dual, indeterminate character, vacillating between love of the heights and hatred of those who have already achieved them. He is, he says himself, an aristocrat. He has learned the secrets of good society. He is polished but vulgar within. He already wears his tails and tastes, but there is no guarantee of his personal cleanliness. He says that this is the kind of character which would be able to finally be able to learn easily and eventually have a progeny. So for him, um, is Jean who has, he says, who is now rising, and he has an upper hand of a character like Miss Julie. Um, and finally, he's talking about how he, in his play, has some elements of drama, has some elements of some unrealistic elements, but he has tried to remain um, true to nature when it comes to psychology of the characters. So as I was saying that 20th century playwrights were moving towards realism. August Strindberg insists that, at least in terms of psychological correctness, in terms of psychological processes, he is moving close towards nature. Okay, our inquisitive souls are no longer satisfied with seeing things happen. We should know how how they happen, and uh, and then he goes on to talk about how he has some very stock elements, but the whole idea is that he wants to make the psychology of a person more and more close to nature. Okay, and towards the end he says that there is this now slow movement towards naturalism in theatre. So he says no revolution but just some small modifications, for to make the stage into a real room with fourth wall missing would be too upset would not be would be too upsetting altogether. So he says that this is a beginning of the intimate theatre which he eventually develops. In a modern psychological drama where the subtlest reactions of a character need to be mirrored in the face rather than expressed by sound and gesture, it would be worthwhile experimenting with powerful side lighting on a small stage and cast without makeup. So he wants you to come close and close and closer to nature and do it on a small stage in front of a smaller audience. And this is what we mean as an intimate theatre. Finally, he says that we could have a small stage and a small house, and then perhaps a new dramatic art might arise, and theatre once more to become a place for entertainment for educated people. So, this is the reading of August Strindberg's Miss Julie. So, as I was saying, that with Miss Julie, it is important to keep in mind that the Darwin's Origin of Species is very, very important, and this belongs to a generation which has taken Darwin's Origin of Species really seriously. And it is not just Strindberg. It was a time there were many institutions, in fact, who had taken the reading of Darwin's Origin of Species to a different level altogether. And for a very long time, many women were just assumed, it was assumed that they were unfit to be breeding in society. And this happened at the policy and human rights level also. So Strindberg is not the only person to have such beliefs which seem very problematic in this day and age. In fact, throughout the world, there were policies which drew a lot from Darwin's Origins of a Species. So, this was a reading of August Strindberg's Miss Julie. It is very much related to 20th century drama. Later on, it's inspired many other playwrights to do many more innovations to their drama, and August Strindberg is one important playwright who was one of the pioneers to set in motion great change in drama. So this was the preface to Miss Julie. For more such videos, please visit my channel again. Like, share, subscribe, comment if you like this video. Thank you.